Monetary policy. It's an important aspect of our economy, both regular but especially in Keynesian economics. To understand monetary policy, you first need to know what the Fed is. The Fed, also known as the central bank, is a nonpartisan government office in charge of controlling the money supply. They do this to shift the economy in certain ways. So, how would the Fed go about shifting the economy? The economy is this big, complicated machine. It's buying and selling and stocks and bonds, and it's not as complicated, at least for the Fed, as it may seem. There are 4 tools the Fed uses in order to shift the economy. The first tool they can use is open market operations, or OMO. Open market operations are the buying and selling of securities, also and more commonly referred to as bonds. By buying and selling of bonds, also known as securities, by selling bonds, the Fed is decreasing the money supply, as they are giving a piece of paper, collecting interest on it, in exchange for real money, taking that money out of circulation. Now, when the Fed buys that piece of paper back from that person and exchanges it for money plus interest, whatever the interest was on that piece of paper, they are increasing the money supply, as they are giving money to the people, thus increasing the amount of money in circulation. The second tool of the Fed is the discount rate. The discount rate is the rate banks pay to the Fed when they borrow money. When the Fed increases the discount rate, the money supply drops. This is because more banks are unable to stay afloat, meaning they are not able to artificially create more for the money supply. Now, the third tool of the Fed is the reserve requirements. Reserve requirements are the amount of money banks are required to keep in the bank rather than loaning out to other people. When the Fed increases the reserve requirements, it does the same thing the discount rate does, making it so that banks are unable to loan out as much. The fourth and final tool of the Fed is the federal funds rate, or FF. This is the interest rate that banks pay each other for overnight loans, typically. This is because if Mr. Stowers came and borrowed more money than the bank had in its reserve requirements, they would need to borrow money from a nearby bank in order to give it to Mr. Stowers. These are typically overnight loans, possibly 2 days. Typically no more than that, other than if it were longer, it would have been the discount rate, which is a longer term loan from the Fed. So, why does this matter? How does this... I explained a little bit on how this affects it, but it affects more than just the money supply, because the money supply affects everything else. Let me show you some examples. 2 ways to run monetary policy: expansionary and contractionary, also known as easy or tight money. Easy or expansionary money monetary policy is the buying of bonds or the lowering of the discount rate, reserve requirements, and federal funds rate. These, as I've discussed, raise the money supply. The money supply, as I said, affects everything else. We can see from the Phillips curve that the inflation rate will go down. If inflation rates go down, then business investment goes up. Business investment going up means that there's more demand going on. So aggregate demand will increase, increasing the price level and GDP, as we can see through the aggregate demand and supply graphs. This lowers unemployment, as more demand and higher GDP means we need more workers. More workers means less unemployment, because we're using more of our labor force. Contractionary policy is the reverse of expansionary. The selling of bonds, the raising of the discount rate, reserve requirement, and federal funds rate lowering the money supply, increasing inflation rates, lowering investment, which in turn lowers aggregate demand, which in turn lowers price level, which in turn lowers GDP, thus raising unemployment. So the economy runs on a pretty simple formula, once you know it. This is a visual representation of the expansionary monetary policy on the graphs. A money market graph, expansionary monetary policy, is the Fed increasing money supply. Increasing money supply lowers the interest rate. Lowering the interest rate increases aggregate demand because businesses are investing. By increasing aggregate demand, it increases price level and GDP. Contractionary fiscal policy, on the other hand, is a decrease in money supply, which decreases the natural interest rates, which decreases aggregate demand as business investments go down, which decreases price level and output.